So I think I'm really ready to talk about decolonizing anger management and talk about like what that means to me and um, just I think really begin breaking the ice on it. I think it's going to be a series of videos and a series of writings and blog posts about what this really means to me in the different layers. So I think how I'm going to touch base on it today and how I'm going to introduce the topic for folks and maybe even lay out a path for folks to start asking questions, both for myself to think more critically about and also about what's really coming up for folks and how to fill those gaps. I feel like anger management is definitely a one-way street, and sometimes we push things like being flexible or managing reactions or like nothing needs a reaction right now, all this stuff, and we're not thinking about that other folks are not trying to be flexible with those people. Other folks are not trying to manage their reactions. And so when we think about just kind of like that build and then like the trauma chains and the history, just sort of like the body's physiological memory, like our muscle memory of how to react to certain situations, like it can really feel daunting. It can really feel like, well, how will I change my reaction to this? And I think part of my biggest beef with anger management is that we're typically sending folks who have expressions of anger that are outside the norm. And what's normal is very heteronormative, is very like straight thinking, is very white, it's very Eurocentric, is very capitalistic, is very like built around money and productivity and what is quote unquote professional. And all these things are really just coded in racial undertones and sexist undertones and really undermine people's reactions and are really statements about who's allowed to feel anger and who is allowed to safely express different forms of anger. And so I think like, when we look at historically lots of instances folks getting angry in public, it's really easy to see like racial disparities. We most often see folks intervening if a man is arguing with a woman, and less so if it looks like the woman is the aggressor. So even just looking at sort of assumptions that we make based on the binary, based on our own assumptions of those people's genders and what their argument, what that sort of like is about. So even sort of just thinking about anger management comes with having to acknowledge the implicit and internal biases and the learned behaviors. And really at the core of anger management and at the core of decolonizing anger management and decolonizing different forms of mental health and mental health education is talking about how can we acknowledge that our first response is who we've been conditioned to be and our second response is who we really are, and how do we begin to really foster that second response and that kind of taking a step back and stepping into our power, reclaiming that piece of I can actually own my energy. Actually, energy is a currency which I exchange with others, and I have power and influence in any space I step in. So how can we retrain anger management to be less about limiting and controlling expression and more about expanding and exploring collaborative processes for expression? And I think I lied. That's not all my biggest beef with anger management. I think really my biggest issue with anger management is that we're looking at a series of quieting and calming people. And I think that there is a time and place to be angry. And there's a lot of things to be angry about right now. And I think that a lot of folks that get tracked into anger management classes are experiencing oppressions and are experiencing things that are difficult to name, and or other people are not naming them or are gaslighting them, are really aggressively denying to them that these things are real when it comes to race, when it comes to class, when it comes to sex, when it comes to sexuality, and just kind of like the different able-bodiedness, all these different things, access to speaking the dominant language, to access to dominant culture, these different things that kind of track and box people up. So there are, I think, a lot of us, I'll speak for myself, that I'm very connected to the warrior spirit that is in my ancestral line. I'm very connected to the desire to fight. I feel like I've been here before, and I feel like I fought this fight before, and I feel like I'm continuing the work and the fight of my ancestors. And so I'm very much embedded in a warrior mentality, in this sort of idea where I'm very afraid of people trying to take advantage of me. And as you know, a woman, at like, I do feel like that is sometimes true, often true, and that is in a lot of ways, I think, staggered and layered with how people relay to me how they see my worth and value in different ways. So I think I'm very cautious to curve people's warrior spirit. I'm very cautious to curve their anger and curve those things, because sometimes they have anger that can just be redirected. Like, can I, as a clinician, can I, as a therapist, redirect this power and this passion and this momentum into a way for you to work on yourself creatively and really expand your vision of how you incorporate this part of you in? Because I don't want to erase this part. It's, you know, it's connected to who you are and who you've been. And the reason why people have anger management problems is because we learn that this works, right? So that's how human beings learn, is we learn based on what works. So for a long time, that worked for them. So to think about, what situations do people have to be in for these extreme, what feels extreme to us or to other folks, what feels like an extreme expression of anger, what do people survive in order for them to be in situations where this kind of behavior works? And so when we really are able to move back away from how hurt we feel based on other people's expression of anger, we can really think about what is, one, the underlying hurt here, and two, how can we redirect and make space for that hurt so that we can move forward and upward. So that's where I'm going to start. I'm going to keep talking about this, keep writing about this, so stay tuned. And thanks again so much for your attention and time.